Greetings and welcome to the Act React podcast. I'm Daniel Burkholder, a dance artist based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Potawatomi peoples, and the host of this podcast. In this episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Mayfield Brooks, a singular artist whose performance work defies definition while staying deeply rooted in the body and dance. We discuss a number of their artistic projects and performances, along with some of their artistic conceptual frameworks, such as Improvising While Black and Composting dance. There's a lot to dig into this conversation, pun intended. I am excited to hear how this episode and Mayfield's work inspires you all. If you are unfamiliar with Mayfield's work, here's their bio to get you oriented. Mayfield Brooks improvises while Black and is based on Lenapehoking, the unceded land of the Lenape people, also known as New York City. Brooks is a movement-based performance artist, vocalist, urban farmer, writer, and wanderer. Brooks teaches and performs practices that arise from improvising while Black, their interdisciplinary dance methodology that explores the decomposed matter of Black life and engages in dance improvisation, disorientation, descent, and ancestral healing. Brooks is a 2021 recipient of the biennial Merce Cunningham Award from the Foundation of Contemporary Arts, a 2021 Bessie New York Dance and Performance Award nominee for their experimental dance film Whale Fall, and a 2022 Dance Space Project Platform Artist. They were a 2022-23 Holder Fellow at Princeton University and the 2024 Alma Hawkins Visiting Chair at UCLA within the World Arts and Cultures Dance Program. Currently, they are a 2025 Creative Time Research and Development Fellow. They love living by the sea. Please enjoy my conversation with Mayfield Brooks. Good morning, Mayfield, and so thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I know we've been going back and forth for a while, so I'm really glad it's happening. Mm-hmm. And kind of the first question I start with most people is, how does improvisation show up in your artistic work, in your teaching, in your everyday life? Like, how does improvisation manifest itself for you?
It's a great question. I feel the first thought that came to my mind just a moment ago was, I feel improvisation in my bones. And it's really a part of how I live my life, but also how I understand dance as a way to navigate life, as a way to navigate life. And it's almost like dance gave me the opportunity to understand improvisation as a tool for change, as a tool for creativity, as a way to bring people together in community through many different times in my life. Over time, I found improvisation to be something that connected my work life with my creative life, meaning I had a day job for a long time, and I danced alongside having a day job. And I felt like improvisation was the connector between those two aspects of my work. And my day job was urban gardening. And so I definitely feel like with urban gardening, you have to improvise a lot. You have to troubleshoot, and also with dance too. And the two of them really have come together now that I'm a full-time freelance artist.
Yeah, that's great. I was definitely on my kind of little list of things I have to check in was about the urban gardening and urban farming, and you've mentioned that was there was back and forth information, and that informed and influenced some of the work that you've done. And I was curious about hearing more about that. I have my my partner and I have a huge garden in our backyard as well, and it definitely feels improvisational. As a whole, we have a little yard, and it's to the chagrin of many of, I think, our neighbors, we are improvising what that means to have a yard.
Great.
So I'm curious, like, is there anything more you can say about that? Like, how does that being in touch with plants and the earth and growing things, that relationship between your creative and artistic work?
Well, initially it was a way for me to keep dancing and also have a kind of freedom in my schedule, because with gardening, you can work seasonally, you can find jobs that are more flexible, whether it's landscaping or teaching kids, and uh to navigate my life, especially when I was living in San Francisco as an artist and as a dance person, it took some improvising and some finesse to be able to keep it up and also make a living. And so I think the initial gift that the work gave me was a certain sustaining of physicality and curiosity, and um, learning about the cycles of life, and, you know, finding beauty in the urban landscape and the dance within that, and also just a way to make a living. And then over time, I found this to be a conversation with the dance classes that I was taking, whether it was capoeira or, um, you know, technique class, or being at Moving On Center studying somatics, and then finally in 2019 I decided to be a freelance artist, and I I started this project where I was burying my body in compost. And that came out of a job that I had in the Bronx where I was running an urban farm, and I was making compost with kids and just trying to like sustain this little plot of land in the Bronx. And at the same time I was going downtown and dancing, and I was like, how can I, what is happening? How can I, understand this process of decomposition? And I just ended up trying this experiment where I was really working with the weight of the dirt and the compost. And I was able to get all of these decomposed flowers from the flower district. And that was literally my first project. I called it Viewing Hours, where it was like a durational piece. I called it like a decomposing dance and choreographing breath, where people would come and spend time with me while I was under the weight of this, organic material. And I was under there for like 2 hours, and people would come like 15 minutes at a time and just take in all the smells and the sights, and, my body under this massive amount of uh decomposing material. And yeah, that was a beautiful experience, and it really shifted my practice into exploring what does it actually mean to decompose dance, uh which is really what I do. And it brought a whole other understanding of improvisation into my practice too.
Could you say a little bit more? I was curious about the using the term decomposing dance, that phrase, and
Yeah.
in your artistic practice, what is that? And you could talk about that in relation to improvisation or just in general. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean for you?
Well, after I left San Francisco in 2012, I went to UC Davis to get my MFA in choreography. And I started investigating um, improvisation more deeply, more intensely. It was such a great laboratory, and there are so many awesome artists that were coming through that program from San Francisco. Um, and that's where I kind of discovered like the umbrella term and methodology for my practice, and I called it improvising while black. And it came out of some questions that I had around the corporeality of dance, like what bodies have been allowed to move, uh have been policed, have been uh what is the construct of the body of the human, and the ontology of humanness, and that it became this philosophical project of like questioning and delving into some theoretical texts. And I related it to my own experience of being racially profiled myself in San Francisco, um, where I had this incident of driving while black and being incarcerated and just feeling like, whoa, like this is a moment where my body feels, like it has no agency, just to be in this situation where I didn't know why I was being, I mean, it was a traffic violation and yet I was, put in jail. It was just ridiculous. And, at the end of the whole ordeal, I, the police department, when I went and talked to them, they were just like, "We're really sorry. They just targeted you. There's nothing we could do." And I was like, wow, this is a classic example of just being in a body that is not my, this is that, however that my body was being projected onto, it's not actually a body, right? So that's really where this idea of like the decomposed matter of Black life came up for me, and just through my readings of whether it was Toni Morrison or other um, Black writers, this kind of subject kept coming up, and that's where my project, Improvising While Black, came to life. And then over time, as I was like, oh, I'm also doing this farming, and I'm also doing this, you know, uh, improvisation, and I'm also working. I was really dancing a lot at that time with a lot of different kinds of dance that would incorporate improvisation, but never surrender. You know what I mean? Like when you're doing technique, it's like you learn the technique, you learn, you know, whatever the codes are to that particular movement style. And the more that I worked with improvisation and with somatics specifically, and the senses, where sometimes I would dance blindfolded, or sometimes I would, just do the body scanning or body mind centering or whatever it was, and I started to recognize another kind of movement available that wasn't just about like learning steps or choreography or um whatever a technique might be. And that whether it was Laban or any kind of like, and so that was like really interesting to kind of go into these other ways of understanding how my body was moving, whether my organs were moving or whether I was like exploring a movement practice that was just about being in a certain environment. And so I think that, when I finally came to this understanding of like what I was doing with the compost and then what I wanted to, how I wanted to integrate that with my body, it became this very composed work where, it was an installation, it was 2 hours. Um, the way that I invited the audience into the work was very much about like their intention. I invited them to question how they were seeing me and my body and asking them if they could be a witness to this process of decomposition and it, how does decomposition like perhaps offer another way into reparative work, reparations, and so after that they would come and they would be with me. I would just be in repose. But the feedback that I got from a lot of people was that they really noticed the breath moving, and that was really striking for them. And so that's why it came to be this kind of decomposing dance, choreographing breath piece. And then over time it developed because I started working with even the practice of like emerging from that, which was really intense because after 2 hours under so much compression, the emergence is like I was becoming a new body. And then how do I move after that? So yeah, that was...
Thank you for all of that. There's many things to follow up on in that. And I guess the first thing I want to kind of maybe jump back to is you mentioned when you had the incident in San Francisco where you were profiled and incarcerated. Shocking that the police were just like, oops, our bad. Kind of. That was amazing. Like just lack of many things, I guess we could say. But you mentioned like in that moment you felt or had a realization of not having any agency over your body. And there's something about that I'm sure was important in terms of your experience with improvisation and improvising while Black, but then also kind of as you were describing your relationship with your improvisational practice unfolding from these techniques that maybe give you these codes or these here's some steps and you can improvise within this framework to a different kind of palette through somatics and other practices. It's, to me, my experience of that space is that it's about how do I have agency over my body and not be controlled by even just like the suggestion of technique, let alone larger authority structures. So yeah, I think there's something in there that I'd love to hear you talk more about is like improvisation in your practices as a practice of agency and maybe how that then brings in how you develop your performance works and those relationships.
Yeah, I think for me, it's key to just like surrender to the unknown in the process of improvisation. And yeah, and also, that it's a process, because I was never a ballet trained dancer, or like super trained. I came to dance later in life, when I was in college, and it was after I had already been an athlete. I was a track and field athlete, and so I was a runner. And yet, when I started getting into dance, it was like my last year in college, and I was at I was in a program, the Trinity La Mama program. It was really awesome. It's like we just got exposed to so many artists, and that's where I started dancing. But I really needed the structure of technique. Like, I really like wanted to train my body to just to dance and to enjoy the fullness of what that felt like. And so it was really a gift that I found Moving On Center, because at that time, Moving On Center was a real mix of training. It was the performance training, it was the somatic training, and there was also the technical training, which was mostly release technique. And from there, and it was housed in this incredible place, right? The Alice Art Center at the time. And I just had a whole palette of I had a whole assortment of classes that I could take. And so it was great. And I think that, just to answer your question, I'm sorry, there's like somebody mowing a lawn out there. So just to answer your question about, can you repeat the question actually?
Yeah, I think so. It was about thinking about agency, improvisation, performance work, how
Yeah,
those things kind of weave together.
right. So I was thinking about this coming from like having some training and really enjoying that, as like, this is what I'm doing. I'm like training my body the same way I was training in sports, just to understand like what is happening, and finding agency there, finding more ability, but then finding the joy in improvisation, and finding the possibilities, and how improvisation was just like a way for something authentic to come through in movement in general, whether it was taking a West African dance class, or, a ballet class. It really didn't matter whether it was a teacher improvising, or, it's just, and so starting to understand the layers of agency through how I was processing information that I was learning as a dancer, and also how I was just learning dance. And so what I love about the process of kind of surrendering to improvisation, for me, it's also about like understanding, and um what's the word? The word is like, it's in deconstructing the pedagogy of how I'm learning. So, it's like I think most dancers go through this, but it's kind of like, after a while, you just start to, or for me, I just started to I wanted to know, well, how am I learning this? And improvisation was kind of like a way to like unravel and unpack like the how of it. And I guess because I'm like a huge nerd, I'm always wanting to be in the how of things. And I kept learning, of course, taking classes and um, working with other choreographers and learning that way too, and training in different ways. But at the same time, I was writing and dancing on my own and really curious about, well, how am I learning all of these other practices? And so for me to deconstruct pedagogy to learn the how of something is also to decompose, and then I can recompose, I can put it back together like Legos, but then I could take it apart. And so this beautiful, it just, that's where the excitement was for me. And I think that's really shows up in my creative process, but also in my performance work, and this kind of decomposing, recomposing, um, back and forth conversation of how am I doing, how am I not doing, how am I undoing.
That's great. It makes me think of um like from like body mind centering work, or even like Peggy Hackney's kind of Laban work that brings in some of that to this idea of differentiation and integration.
Yes,
Taking
totally.
taking things apart and then putting them back together. And
Yeah.
by taking them apart, we understand how they all work together in a better, more sophisticated way.
Yeah.
And we have more choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like when we take something apart and understand the parts, then we can make choices around how to put it back together.
Right.
And I
Right.
always think of like when I'm teaching improvisation, that's what I'm doing a lot of times with students. I'm just pointing out all the things that they're doing so that then they can make a choice about the things to do. Right?
Yes.
It's like I don't have any information other than I just like, oh, look at this, look at that, look at that.
Right.
And oh, right.
Right.
Uh, um,
It's very liberating. It's very liberating to actually start to unpack and deconstruct the learning of something. And maybe that's something that is missing in a lot of education, because it takes time. It takes a lot of time to commit to that.
yeah, and it's harder just to have a simple quiz or something to grade that
But it's
virtual.
so exciting. I love being able to be in that space of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love when you're talking about being in grad school and you said you were like, geeking out and like reading all this stuff and getting into this. I was like, oh, that sounds like the perfect grad school experience. It's exactly what you're supposed to do is like geek out on all this stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, totally. So, I guess like taking all of that and thinking about this framework that you work with and that I think has been really influential in the improv world and art world and dance world is improvising while Black. Um, so I'm curious, could you say more about like that approach and also just your decision to put that out there so like clearly,
Mhm.
right? You could have been a little bit more like subtle with it, but I think by stating it, it really offers us who interact with your work either through your written work or your performance work to have to kind of like hold that and
Yeah,
and be with that.
yeah. For me, it was so liberating just to acknowledge my experience, and within that acknowledgement, do my work without question, without, and so yeah, just to just go in, um and that's what I do. I just yeah, it's just like, it's like diving off of a huge cliff into the water, and it's just, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know. And I don't want to know. I want to dive in, and I want to always keep that spirit in my work, because I know that my ancestors that came before me had to have that spirit. And that's why I'm here. That's how I'm here. I just read an incredible book, James by Percival Everett,
Oh, yeah.
and it was all about the perspective of Jim and the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, who was Huck Finn's companion and was a slave. And it was such an incredible story because, talk about agency, right? Like a slave has no agency. And yet, the way that Everett gave the character a voice allowed for the layers of the experience of this character to come through. And the I think what I learned more than anything else through this character was that the character always had to be okay with being in the unknown. It was just this like it was so amazing that he was able to capture that, the essence of that, through this character, through this character's story and this character's voice and this character's experience and what this character saw, and would hear. It was very sensorial. And so that's the part, that's like the flavor or the texture of what I like to entertain and invite others into, because if I'm saying this is my work, and then, I'm teaching and I'm traveling to different countries, and, how do I invite people into that? And the way that I keep the invitation open is to say, okay, for me, this is about being in the unknown. How do we go there together? Or how do you find that in your practice? Or, how do we go on this collective journey to find that in a practice that we discover together? And that's like, for me, the entry point.
It makes me think about some of your recent work, like whale falling and what was the other one? The dark oxygen.
Yes.
At which so brilliant. I mean, I just read a little bit about it, just a couple of days and stuff. And so there does seem to be a reoccurring connection for you with the ocean,
Yeah.
which is, as we know, like one of the most unknown, like the most unknown thing on the planet.
Yeah.
We know more about the moon than we do about the ocean in some ways, right?
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear more of either about those works specifically or just in general, like that connection to, I mean, I think about also you as an urban gardener and farmer and connected to the earth and nature. And so there's some logic there, but also what specifically about the ocean that is so compelling for you?
Yeah. It's interesting because something that I've been really thinking about, especially with this political climate that we're in, and with so much violence and war happening all over the world, like so many hot spots. It's like the endless war era. Um, More than anything else, I've been thinking about the effect of the sonic experience of that, whether it's, you know, being on social media, which I've taken a break from social media for the past month, which has been great. And, just hearing the ads or, like I live in New York City. So, um, I think that, in times of war, there's always increased security everywhere. So you hear the sirens, you go to the airport and it's like you see more. So just the sonic, like the drone, like the sonic drone of this kind of increased security or militaristic um, reality. And there's something about the ocean that allows for another sonic experience to emerge. And then, I think a lot about the 12 cranial nerves and how they allow for us to work with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and allow, for us to kind of like negotiate survival in any situation. And for me, since I was a very young child, the ocean has always been a place where I just was able to experience so much relief and release and joy and surrender, whether it was the sound of the waves or just having this like endless horizon or being able to run, like without having any uh with no in inhibitions. And I've been thinking a lot about like my first experience of like utter freedom. And it was at the ocean. It was that was where it was, Hammonasset Beach. I remember uh my mom's friend taking me and some other kids and just having this like unforgettable experience. And I think it was because it touched all of my senses. It was such a deep sensory somatic experience. And so through, since I first started dancing, it's that has always come up. And I remember one of my favorite dance classes was Afro-Brazilian dance. I would take class in Oakland, and and also capoeira. I love taking capoeira, and all of those dances are relate to the ocean, and all of the capoeira songs are songs about the sea in Portuguese. And so I never even realized that when I was taking these classes. But now that I've completely immersed myself into this work with whale fall and now with dark oxygen, all of that is coming back as information. And that, some of those dances were some of my formative dances, like the folklore dances were very much about Yemaya, the ocean goddess. Even the samba, I remember dancing samba at ODC. um, and so that was like really formative. And now, the way that I came to this work of whale fall was really because from doing the viewing hours piece where I had buried myself in compost, I had this other commission through Abrams, and it was during COVID, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. And I came upon these articles about all of these whales being like the largest beaching of whales in 2020 off the coast of Tasmania. And that just, it was COVID, and I was just struck by this image of like over 400 whales bodies, just like, and they couldn't recover them. And it really touched something inside of me. And I took I just went into researching, and that's where I found out about the whale fall. And the first, inklings of that project came through me writing about these whales and having these images of them and their bodies. And for me, it was more like, oh, like this is an interspecies event, like how they're dying and how we humans, we're going through this process of death and this pandemic. And And it brought me back to um, viewing hours and the compost and the decomposing, and then that's what brought me into this research about the whale fall and the regeneration that happens. And so the question came up of like, who am I feeding? Because when they die in the ocean like that, it's not just about the death. It's also about like all of like this huge event, this huge feast, and then this movement, right? Like this falling to this massive, massive body to the bottom of the sea, and how that their bones just like sprout entirely new ecosystems. And so for me, that's dance. That's like, and at that point, I was like, wow, like this is another direction I'm going in with my work, but it's also a whole other field of research that I felt I was being invited into by these mammals. And then of course like the ocean as a space of movement, as a space of I don't know, just the ocean. The ocean is also the lung of the earth. And that brought me back to somatics. And so, yeah, it's just been an incredible journey of learning and exchange within this interspecies choreography. Um, and I've had so many different experiences as a result. I've been able to. I'm actually living by the beach right now. I'm living in Rockaway, and I had one of my first experiences of a beached whale here. It was like a baby sperm whale, right here in New York. It's like, oh my gosh. So, yeah, I don't know. I think kind of like back to the beginning of our conversation about improvisation, it's like being in the question, being in the unknown, and just allowing, just following my nose and allowing the work to unfold. I'm just a vessel. And yeah, I don't know, that I feel like that's really.
Yeah. Can I feel like we're kind of coming to an end. I don't want to take up too much of your time, though. I feel like there's so many threads I still want to pull on and ask about. But I do want to kind of again get a little nerdy or geeky in asking you about when you go into performance, like what does that like what do you know? Like what's the score? What's the structure? Like how much do you know? How much is planned? How much is open? Like what is that kind of, your set of instructions or your structure or your score? Like what does that look like when you're going into performance?
Yeah, I feel like it might be something like my approach is I don't really know what architects do, but I feel like it's something like that. Like if I was an architect, I would I see the entire blueprint. Like, so for example, my last or my most recent project, Dark Oxygen, where I'm just like super fascinated with this little phenomenon. I mean, it's actually a huge phenomenon of how oxygen is produced in the deep sea through these metallic nodules that split seawater, split the molecule, in the darkness without photosynthesis. And so the curiosity of that, like, what does that produce? How does that even happen? And so to translate that creatively for me it's just this question of like, what is oxygen in the dark in this body? And what is the lineage of that? And so it became more about the breath. And so I started to work with breath as dance. And already I'm working with that, like the choreography of breath. But then like I'm also thinking about and feeling through my background with, the gospel and how I grew up in this Pentecostal church, and like how when I was learning how to sing the gospel, it was really about the breath, it's like, how can you sustain this long gospel song? And so I started to kind of create these dances that were more about like breath and gospel and movement, and what kind of like, how does the breath move the body, and how does the body move the breath? And that became a kind of foundation for the work in terms of the movement material. And it's hard to explain, right? Because it's like, when I remember growing up in the church, it's like once you start singing, you have to also kind of give up your expectation and go into the improvisation of that. But then to also combine that with movement was like, I just kept going into these spirals, you know. Um, and it's still a work in progress. So I'm still really just in the texture of it. But it's just, for me, it was another space of like, how can I be in this unknown, working with this breath, working with this, this gospel memory that I have growing up as a child, and you know, just finding the tension in there. Um, and so it became this beautiful liberation for me too, to let go of the words, to let go of the song, but to find the essence of what is that tone. And then with the dark oxygen, you know, I first performed it in Judson Church. And so that was a perfect environment, and being the architect, and how do I work with the space? How do I go into the depths, And so the first part of the piece is just the breath. I have the microphone and I have the breath, and it's to play with the light in the church. There's this like incredible stained glass window, and the only way that you can um use that as light, you have to like go to another part of the church to turn turn the light on so that window is illuminated. And a lot of times people don't even notice it because it's not part of the lighting board or anything like that. You have to go somewhere else. So that was one of the first things that I used in the church. And it became this beautiful glowing orb the whole time that I was performing. Um and then of course, we used other kinds of light and just shifted the whole space to be more of a sonic environment, and I invited the audience to let themselves lie down, like if they wanted to just experience the piece more sonically, they could do that. And so it was a really interesting affect where, because the audience was more a part of the piece, I could move in and out of them, and also sometimes even sing to them. And yeah, so the piece is still developing, but I found that, the question that kept coming up for me is, how do I work in a way that allows for the actual experience of the work to be, to be the piece. So that's the process that I'm in right now. It's like, what is the experiential, how do we all experience this together? How do if this piece is about breath, if it's about like being in this kind of incredible, like opportunistic space of like what the dark oxygen might allow for, the bioluminescence, the whatever it might be, whatever the imagination might be that comes through this phenomenon. How can we all experience it together? How can this be like a collective invitation to breathe together in a time when it's like, I feel like a lot of us are just trying to catch our breath. There's so much happening. There's so much information. There's kind of like I was saying about the wars and the kind of intense tension that can come with being in a pressurized environment. Where's the breath?
Yeah. Thank you. I love the thought of like how to construct an experience for an audience and invite them to experience the piece with you, as opposed to them just viewing the piece or watching the piece, which is part of it, obviously, but it can be so much more full than that. And I also really appreciate that you address your vocalization, your singing, and because that seems also really important to what you're doing as an artist. And it was definitely on my list. We didn't get to many things on my list, but but thank you for bringing that in, because I was super curious about it. Well, Mayfield, thanks so much again for taking the time today and talking with me. I'm really glad to gain some more insight into your practice as an artist, and of course, improvising and all that, but also just that broader sense of who you are in the world. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thanks for joining for this episode of the 5th season of Act React. I hope you found my conversation with Mayfield as inspiring as I did. Episodes drop every other Thursday. So the next episode drops on August 21st. And that'll be my conversation with Ann Cooper Albright. Another one you'll definitely want to check out. In the meantime, please follow our social media. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok, and we've got the Act React profile on Facebook and YouTube. We'll be sharing video excerpts from previous conversations, as well as some fun and inspiring quotes. So stay tuned and keep an eye out for those. And also, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it, or if on YouTube, you watch it. I look forward to sharing more episodes as the season continues. Until then, live spontaneously.